Welcome to What I Meant to Say, where we discuss parenting, relationships, and wisdom that can be passed down through generations. Thank you so much. I'm joined today by Marcus Aurelius Higgs. Shout out to the Stoics. I love your name. And there you go. Yep. So good. And Marcus is a presence coach for parents of preteens. And as soon as I heard that title, I was like, oh yeah, this is right up my alley. So I'm glad we connected, and this is going to be an awesome conversation because, helping the next generation be more resilient and really learn how to connect with themselves is my passion. And through parenting, I've done that, and the things I write about. And I'm so excited to get your perspective and go back and forth on that today. So thanks for joining me.
Wonderful to be here, Wendy. Thank you for sharing the platform. But it sounds as though there's going to be a lot of preaching to the choir here. But if not, I welcome any perspective, pushbacks. Let's dive into it. Like I said, I'm here to learn from you, most definitely.
Well, I love that. And that's what I love about podcasts. I've realized something in the audio or even visual place that we live today where I'm always taking in content, but I love the conversations. And I realize now why I ended up in the podcast arena, because I can do audiobooks and there's so much good content out there. But the conversations for me are what, like, I'm lit up. And in the audiobooks, sometimes I'm like, okay, refocus. Like I love the two voices going back and forth. So it's really, perspective is everything. There's always something to learn.
I am a lover of words, as I heard you are also. It was told to me. So I love the etymology, but conversation, Vasari means to turn. Did we mention this on the call? Did you?
I don't think so.
Watch this, right? So that's where we get version from, or that's where we get universe. It means one turning, but a conversation means a turning with. And what you're doing is you're turning your ideas with another person. And that's what dancing is. Dancing is a conversation, but it's turning with the other person. It's and we're turning our ideas. So iron sharpens iron. Let's do it.
One of the things I was thinking on the way to the office to have this conversation was, there's a sense today, in my opinion, that the message that a lot of kids are getting out there is, it's almost an anti-resilience message. Like, okay. I want kids to understand how strong and amazing they are. And yes, like when we go through hard things, we've got to lean on our parents. We lean on other people, the people that can help guide us through, right? Mm-hmm. But they're so amazingly strong. And I'd love to hear your perspective. That's kind of just where I thought we could start off. But like, how do parents help their kids realize how strong they are while still being super supportive?
Yeah. The first thing that came to mind is, two things come to mind, and I'll share both of them. But the first thing that came to mind is, if you believe they're so strong, we form our beliefs by evidence and examples. We have lived experience, and we may know other stories of what other people have overcome. But if there are no evidence and examples in this kid's life of them being strong, why would they believe it?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next thing that came to mind is, I used to teach high school English, and at the beginning of the class, we'd have what we call quick writes. You would put up a picture, a prompt or something or whatever, and we'd write for 5 minutes on it. And one morning, we had that Merriam-Webster quote about Marianne Williamson quote about your greatest fear. And are you familiar with it?
But I love her, but the quote's not coming to me.
I don't know the quote exactly, but it's oftentimes attributed to Nelson Mandela, saying your greatest fear is that you are great beyond belief. You're so powerful, you're so strong, and you don't want to live into it, right? Yes. And I remember this 12th grader, she said, I don't believe that. And I paused and I said, I accept if you don't believe that. I said, but I believe that about you. I said, I do believe that about you. And we don't have to believe the same thing. But I will live my life in this class to give you evidence and examples of how you can start moving towards that.
Yeah.
It's also interesting. that same student, we did another writing prompt, and there was this song she shared talking about all of this is another thread worth pulling, but it's social media, and it was this catchy song talking about depression, loneliness, and how this and that, and it's began identity. What do you attach your identity to? And she attached her identity to that song, so she started to live into that. She started to be influenced by that, quite literally. So that's on the other end of the spectrum as to why kids won't believe it, because again, you get to choose what your belief is. That's but they don't
Yeah.
know that yet. Yeah.
No, I know. I constantly, I've brought that up with my son about, you know, the five people that you spend the most time with, right? It's like
Hmm.
they shape who you become. And I'm such a huge believer in teachers and coaches as a
Hmm.
parent
Hmm.
because, man, parents need help and teachers and coaches are fundamental in helping
Hmm.
these kids have a different messenger. They don't always want to hear it from us. And when someone comes in, I love, I mean, the concept of free writing for 5 minutes. I'm a huge proponent of that as a coach. And just that idea that you can't mess it up and I'm here for you to like express yourself and you can't get it right or wrong. You're just expressing. You know, it's such a freeing concept for kids to start to understand who they are, but they don't realize the lyrics that are coming in, the scrolling, the reels, and then the way the algorithms are set up today that, you know, you don't necessarily get the other perspective. You're getting more of the same and you're going down that rabbit hole. It's you know, we have to help guide them. And so,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
how
Yeah.
did you move from English, from being an English teacher into this presence coaching realm?
Sure. Um, my last major stint in the classroom was in Thailand at an international school, and I, I feel I feel traditional education is not bringing forth the best inside our kids. And no knock to anybody, and I mean, get in how you fit in. We're all trying to figure it out. However, I think with the turn of with what's coming with AI and so on, a lot is going to change.
Yeah.
Um, to your question, how did I start working as a presence coach? So mindfulness has always been a practice of mine from my early age. These are my Thich Nhat Hanh books.
Oh, yes. How to relax.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and how
Yep.
to love. Yeah. Um, and I remember coming out of the class one time and I was speaking to the chair of our department. And I said, you know what? Class feels a lot like therapy sometimes. And he said, Marcus, it's called the humanities because we're teaching them how to be human. And I was like, you're right. We're teaching them how to be human. Um, but when we used to have our parent teacher meetings, I saw how the parents themselves were, frazzled is a very polite way to put it, but they're trying to figure it out too.
Yeah.
And um, Mr. Rogers said, if you want to help the kids, you help the parents. And to tell you the truth, before diving into what I'm doing now, I was a copywriter, or I started being a copywriter for financial markets.
Hmm.
And so I have a skill with words. I did some poetry for you earlier, and
Yeah.
I write and so on. And I'm in tuned with emotions because that's really what it is. But as a copywriter, I was just turning the knobs and dials on people's emotions in regards to scarcity and so on. And I thought, if I became world class at this, would I enjoy this? Would I love this? Would it be worth it? And it was like a hell no. So I was
Yeah.
just like, no, no, no. Like, what? Again, it's your identity. Who am I?
Yeah.
Because I would see the kids in class being stressed out about how their parents are stressed out in regards to, it was during the pandemic as well. Finances, life is stressful. You don't need
Yeah.
added stress on it, man. Um, and I was just like, well, how can I position myself inside this arena as a coach? I think coaching is actually what in societies before modern day societies, those were the people who you'd go to process your thoughts, to your peers again, your elders, your peers, and those the generation after you, where you'd get different perspectives. But Yeah, I wanted to position myself as a person who helped the parent be present when everything else is falling apart. Yeah.
That is, it speaks so clearly to my experience as a parent. And you,
Mhm. Tell me about that.
nobody learns when their nervous system is dysregulated, right? And I very
Mm,
much remember having little kids and knowing that I needed to slow down and get down on their level and talk to them in the, like, not be talking down to them, but look at them and get down on their level. And there's so many little things that I can think back on the now almost 24 years of parenting that it's amazing to look back and see, because it all adds. And that whole concept of being present when we don't know what it is, and I didn't even know what mindfulness was back then, but
mhm,
maybe through
mhm.
my course as an athlete, or I had a sense for what they needed.
Yeah,
And granted, parenting is messy. Like, we all mess
yeah,
stuff up,
yeah.
and you
Mhm,
have to offer yourself and your kids so much grace. But
mhm.
you learn so much through, like, what I've learned is that the bonds are really built through the harder times.
Yeah, yeah,
That if
yes.
you can help guide them and not force them through any kind of fire, you're guiding them through the fire. It it then the good times take care of themselves, right? I mean, that's the fun stuff. But man, it's like, and they say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. So the concept of getting into the preteen years where everything is
Mm.
starting to churn makes so much sense to me, you know?
Um, yeah, yeah, it is that yeah, that turning. There's still some joy in there. There's still that innocence in there, and they still
Yeah.
listen to you, but then you still want to push them like, do what you got to do. But before we get into that,
Yeah.
um, listening to you, a lot of what informs my work also is my experience with my father.
Mhm.
Um, so he was divorced at when I was 12. I grew up in California, SoCal,
Oh,
Riverside. Yeah.
awesome. Yep.
And I moved to the Bahamas. California to the Bahamas, eh?
Yeah, that's a good life. And then you said Thailand, which I've never been, but you've seen some good places.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But he was pursuing his career, doing his thing, and they say the person who knows your insecurities the deepest are you. The person who knows it the second best is your kids.
Yes.
And I would think like, dude, what's wrong with you? Um, you hold more grace, of course, as you're an adult, and you understand we all live in the biggest room, the room for improvement. But let me tell you this: when I was in Thailand, he and I used to talk regularly, and I remember I broke my arm as a kid, and he took me to the emergency room, just dropped everything, and here I am in Thailand, and I was thinking like, dude, I don't have kids, but I was just like, dude, if I had a kid responsible for somebody's life, and I had to drop everything and just go to the emergency room, I said, Dad, like, well, why'd you do that? He's like, dude, you would do the same thing. And he said that, and I thought in my head, would I? And it wasn't out of doubt. It was just out of curiosity. I was just being curious with the
Yeah.
thought. I was like, would I? Here's the thing: you really don't know how you'd answer something until the moment comes. My father, he's aged now. He has his own ailments or whatnot. And when I understood what he was going through, it was just like, no, yeah, I would. I was like, hell yeah. Um,
Mm.
he showed up for me when he showed up for me with as much as he could with what he had, and I'm appreciative of that. So I show up for him, and that was the next thing I want to tell you was when working with teenagers, and I know you're in the throw of it. You're moving them towards their independence, but that's not the final form. It's interdependence on the back end of that.
God, I love that.
For the joy set before you endure, right? Like it's interdependence because there's another relationship on the other side of this, and it's whereas I'm going to take care of me to be in service to you if you promise to take care of you to be in service to me. And that's how our communities grow, that's how our families grow, that's how we make it more robust. Yeah.
Yeah. That is such a beautifully generationally healing message,
Yeah.
because, when we start to realize how far these patterns go back and how we can relate to each other through our strengths. And you and I, we could go down that positive psychology road a little bit too. I'd love to do that. But relating to each other through our strengths and forming those bonds. I mean, I got married at 22. I didn't know myself. I didn't know which end was up. I didn't know where my scars were, where my holes were, what the things I still needed to learn about myself. And yet I've got these 4 beautiful kids that then when I ended up divorced, I had to sit there and go, wait, how did I end up here? Right.
Yeah.
And so that was my journey, was a little bit done backward from what you're explaining. And so that's been my passion for generational healing is, there's always room for a pivot. And at any point in life, like, we're always able to learn and change and grow. But if you can help kids experience less pain, even though life brings pain, right? But with the wisdom, if you don't use the wisdom that you have gained to help other people, then you're missing out on a huge reason of why you went through these struggles, right? So, so I feel like I've kind of had to reverse engineer a little bit, and I love like what you're saying, because you have that the give and take between your father and that the grace you're showing him now. But it's hard to see that when you're young, right? I mean, and those stresses and pressures as a single parent, I feel them, and I know, and I also know, like, this could be controversial. Kids need 2 parents. Like, it is, single parenting should not be glorified. It can be done, but it should not be glorified, in my opinion. And that is from a day-to-day existence. Like, kids need both.
Well, I hear you say both. Let me give you another perspective, because it's called it's called allo parenting. There's a book called Mothers and Others. It's not that kids need 2 parents. It's that kids need a community of parents. It takes a village it takes a village to support a parent. So let me show you. Your child is growing up. Everything that you say to them is gospel. It's black and white. But then they start to understand, oh, no, what you're saying there is wrong. They don't know what nuance is yet. So skepticism actually sets in around 12. And they're saying, you know what? I can't trust you fully. And if I can't trust you, okay, then then what is this world? What is my reality? They then turn to other trustworthy, present people in the community, and ideally you're in a community of other trustworthy, present adults. And oftentimes those are the people who don't judge them for exploring these ideas or these thoughts. As parents, sometimes we judge our kids for, they say good jokes and bad jokes come from the same place. Good jokes and good thoughts and bad thoughts come from the same place, so they don't like to explore these with their parent. But as they explore these with these other people, and ideally these are, again, teachers, coaches, people inside your community who you trust, they start to, again, form their identity. So ideally you're in a pod of parents who want to bring forth the same values you have.
And see, and what I hear in there so much, because I can think of this in my own parenting, is it's easy when we're in a tough moment or a heated moment with our kids to slip into that place of fear, right? And so often when I think back, like, I've had stellar moments of clarity when things get tough, and then I've also seen myself be in that place of fear. And you parent so much differently from those 2 places. And the people that you're talking about, that community, that village, they're not necessarily working so quickly from that place of fear. They have almost like a little bit more objective view of the situation and your child. And it's amazing. And that's, I think, why I can think back on the teachers and coaches that shaped my life, that I still have relationships to this day. And I'm so grateful, because they really did have so much wisdom to impart. And it strikes me that it's just that different perspective, that little bit of space can really add a lot.
That's why, while I don't have kids yet, I see it as my responsibility to contribute back to society. Because for those people who poured into my life when I was a teenager growing up, Very much so. In as much as I give praise to my father, I know them by name. My aunts, my uncles, my teachers, and so on. They
Yeah.
are why I am how I am like this. So that is why I do the work I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is, I mean, that's the wisdom. It's like you don't have to have, I have so many friends that don't have kids, and
Hmm.
that the space they offer to my kids and the wisdom they have to not share that is, yeah. And you just, there's a different capacity to every role, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, my 16-year-old is used to looking at me and saying, okay, mom, go take a nap. Like, you're good. I'm fine. Like, sometimes you just, it's like you end up with the self-awareness and letting them see that you're human. Cause that's definitely
Yeah.
one of the places that I've had to, going from this type A phenomenon of like push, push, push to like really let your kids see you as a human being that makes mistakes and
Yeah.
can say sorry. And I learned that. And here, you have any, and not that I'm not, I don't believe like I'm not a friend to my kid, but at the same
Hmm.
time, there's a reality to that, being able to show them the struggle, that I think there's a real beauty in that.
I hear you say beauty, and we're speaking of resilience. That's actually where they learn how to be resilient. It's in
Yeah.
the when you well, again with the etymology,
Yeah.
resilience comes from resaltar. Re means again, saltar means to jump. It's your bounce back. It's
Oh, I love
to know
that.
that you yeah. So that's how they learn how to bounce back. It's by seeing, oh yeah, you repair and reconnect when you are broken. And there's growth in there's everything that eventually grows must first break. So when
Yeah.
you teach that at an early age, when the stakes are low, um, then they start to find evidence and examples of that as they then start to live life. So I'm trying to implant those as early as possible from the first breaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you help practically? How do you help parents learn some of these? Because you and I could tell we could go on the philosophical game for a long time, which I
Yeah.
love. But like
Sure,
practically
sure,
speaking, and when you're working with parents, like how do you help them ground some of this in like a day-to-day reality?
sure, sure. Um, well, first of all, it's if I'll go through the framework here, the show up
Yes,
framework.
let's do. Yes.
Yeah. So S start with a strong character identity. Everything comes from identity. All actions come from identity. Everything that you do, the fact that you're doing this podcast is because you identify as a person who loves thoughts and ideas. Um, from that early age, the practical aspect of this is bringing their awareness to their virtues that are with all cultures, all walks of faith, or the absence thereof. Everybody, if you're a human, you have virtues, the virtues. These are 24 characteristics that are with everybody. When you start to have conversations about these and showing the kid how, yeah, you made an effort and you made that effort from this virtue, you start to actually have them identify with that virtue. So, yeah, I am like that. That is like me. That's like me. So that's the first step. Um, there are other aspects inside of it where you then have a family virtues in action of what does our family think is valuable, like what's important to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's identity. Start with a strong identity. Second is hold space for collaboration. It, this is when they're going through their first breaking, kids often think, "What's wrong with me?" Right? I mean, all of us. And actually, I'll tell you this, Wendy. As I'm explaining this framework for you, I say kids, but this is human development. This is for everybody on the exterior, on the outside, as well as on the interior.
Yeah.
But hold space for collaboration. Hold space for collaboration means you're not the problem, you are the solution to it. And when you identify as a creator and you address those problems with your character strengths, but collaboration is you're turning towards a problem and saying, hey, let's talk about this. You invite them with active listening, say, tell me your thoughts on this. Even is this a problem for you? Is this something you value? And then there's a framework for it, which you could look it up. It's called collaborative problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I've
you
heard of it.
invite the kid's perspective, and then you bring in your perspective as to why it's important to you, oftentimes towards the well-being of them or for the collective well-being of the group. And then you work on solutions. You come up with solutions that both of you say, yeah, this is what I think it is. O is opening up communication. Communication is key. I remember my communication teacher used to say, the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your communication.
So true.
Your
So
ability
true.
to talk to yourself and your ability to talk with others, and that is to be on the same wavelength and vibe. Um, yeah. So in opening up communication, it's how do you? It's funny because kids don't communicate fairly when they're dysregulated.
Oh, amen.
But you're the adult in the room, right?
Yep.
Um, I realized this while being a teacher. It was just like, oh my goodness. No, that's not
Yeah.
fair. And it's just like, okay, I know it's not fair, but that's why I had to be in integrity. I had to be integrated. I had to say, okay, anyhow, they're gonna push your boundaries. They're gonna see
No.
what they can get away.
Oh my
But
gosh. Yeah. What a gift on that. I mean, I'm finding in each one of these things I can connect to my everyday parenting, but that one is,
oh,
you're absolutely right. And being the adult is hard sometimes. But, that pause space that comes with mindfulness, I did get a text back from my son last night.
mm,
Sorry for arguing. I'll be home at 10. Yeah,
yeah,
because this is the boundary and I'm not
yeah.
backing down. And when you leave, I let you leave, but
And we
there's a
had
consequence on the other
we
side of
agreed
that
on this.
curfew.
Yeah,
Yeah. And if you're not happy about it, I'm sorry. I'm still going to let you go. And I'm going to let you see if you'll, and sometimes you just need that space and they can come back into it. But
yeah.
it's intense. Yeah.
Well, with opening up communication, there are different, again, communication patterns that we can look at where you're passing on your virtues and values. Well, you don't pass on your virtues. The virtues are already with them. Your values of what's important to you without being preachy.
Hmm.
One thing is not speaking to the behavior, but speaking to the principle through story and how you learned that principle, and then inviting them into the conversation. So I don't know the details of the situation, but if I was speaking with your son and I was his teacher, I will talk about the time when um, I came back home and my father, he had locked the door fully because I'm owning the story, right? He had locked the door
Yeah.
fully and there's a chain lock on our door. And I had to go by my friend's house to go sleep by him, right? And I called him in the morning, my dad in the morning, and he was just like, yeah, you knew what time you were supposed to come back, and you weren't there, and I was worried. He's like, "Oh, that's where you're sleeping tonight?" or no, he's like, "Oh, is that where you're living now from now on?" But anyhow, he was
Yeah.
joking about that. But we came back and we had to have a conversation, and right then it clicked to me. He said, "You know, I was worried about you, and I wasn't sure where you were, and I stay up late worrying about that." And
Yeah.
I understood the effect it was having on him of me not being responsible.
Yeah.
Now, if I was speaking to your son, I would stop right there and I'd be like, "What are your thoughts on this?"
Yeah.
Because I'm not telling him what to think. Then it'd be emergent, and sometimes they come up with stuff that I never even thought of, and that's where
Mm,
the conversation opens up.
yeah. And
Because I'm not trying to control anybody, but I am trying to give them my perspective and tell them why this is important to me. Yeah.
yes, and that's that space where they are allowed to build confidence, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's so, to me that, because that's been, teenagers will say that, "Oh, you're trying to control me." No, I'm actually really not trying to control you. My greatest hope is that you turn into a full-fledged member, contributing member of society that lives on his own and finds
Yeah.
his passion and does all these things. So that doesn't come with control.
Mm,
Right?
mm.
We
Uh,
have to allow their world to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah. That said,
And
I think, well, I was gonna say, I think it's a feature, not a bug for
yeah.
conflict. I mean that's what creates the rub. Rumi says, if we always complain about This is a paraphrase. But if we always complain about every irritation that rubs us the wrong way, however will we be polished? And
I love Rumi.
right?
That's absolutely.
So it's when you do set boundaries and you rub up the wrong way, it's you still hold your dignity. You're still a full person. I still love you. These are my needs. It may not be rational to you. I mean, let's have this conversation, but I need to stand firm in who I am and what I believe because I want you to stand firm in who you are and what you believe. And in that bending, not breaking, but in that bending, that is how we grow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So open up communication. And then the next one is W, wonder and explore this world together. Life is about projects. Project, pro means forward, ject means to throw. So we're constantly just throwing it forward, stepping, progressing. So I came out of the classroom and we have what we call project-based learning. And what project-based learning is really what corporate America does, business does, it's what humans do. We critically think of a problem we want to solve. We think of how we might collaborate towards it. We give ourselves a timeline. We then see what our needs, what our resources are, what do we know, what do we need to know. And in this wonder and explore the world together, you have your project that you're working on, and you encourage your kid to choose a self-directed project based on their character strengths, something that contributes back to the community or contributes back to their well-being, something that is working towards well-being. All right. And what you'll always hear me say, back to the community or back to themselves, because the inner place and the outer place, whichever you want to develop, they're actually related.
Yeah.
Well, in working in this project, then it has to be forward facing. You know what a win looks like. You may not make that win, but I mean, it's a project that you choose. And this is from Angela Duckworth in her book Grit. Her family chooses a 6-month-long project, and it could be a sport, could be a language, could be grades, could be a YouTube channel. That's what I did with one of my mentees. It could be you get to choose. Like, how do you want to express yourself? For me, it's this business now. For you, it might be towards a championship. You know what I mean? Or your podcast. But that gives you fodder for your kid to have a discussion about, hey, this is how I'm stepping forward. This is how I'm working. How's it going with you? It gives you a place to meet in conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last one is UP, unveil your potential together. In my framework, it's really about helping the parent put their mask on first. I trust them in their parenting and their expression of their parenting, but I'm trying to keep them stable and them together, knowing that it is personal development what I do, but it's personal development for that parent while you're working on this project, which is your kid. And you and your child unveiling your potential together. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean that honestly, it's so beautiful, and having gone through it and being in it, that it very much it resonates so much with the things that I have grabbed onto over the years, just with the exposure of being curious. I mean, the positive psychology was one of the first things that I remember even before I knew positive psychology and being in a struggle with a toddler and being like, okay, you need to get out of this struggle of the moment. What's the value that you're trying to teach them? Right. And it came through really clear. And then I stumbled onto positive psychology, started doing the VIA character assessment with my kids. And one of my proudest moments was when during COVID, my son was living with a pod of college students. It was his freshman year. And, you know, it was so good. Like, he wanted to go to college and he couldn't go. So, but this group of students organized and, you know, they were living together. And when he called me and said, hey, what's the name of that assessment that you give us, Mom? We want to take it. And I'm like, yes, this is so cool. Like, this is so cool. And, you know, kids, your kids will make fun of you. Oh, Mom's going to make us do this, you know, self-awareness stuff. But it does catch on, and they do start to see like the intrigue and the interest in it. So it's really amazing. But there's there is like, it's such an ideal way to see things. And yet we know, because we're human, there's the struggle is real, and kids, you know, in the brain development and the prefrontal cortex and all the stuff that they are not, you know, as they're learning. I mean, teenage boys will give you a run for your money. I'll tell you that right now. Actually, girls will too. But I think it's because I remember being a girl that it's easier to identify with. And then, you know, the teenage boy, I've never been a teenage boy. So it's hard. And I'm wondering about, like, what is your relationship to consequences? And like, what do you believe about consequences in parenting, and how to, you know, because they do matter, right?
Yeah. Well, no, they do. The etymology of the word is sequence. What follows? Con is with. What follows with this? There are positive consequences and there are negative consequences. And when I say positive and negative, it means, again, all of this comes from you first asking, what do you want? You have to know what your desire is. And on the back end of this action, there's going to be something that follows. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, you've set those expectations and you've had these conversations about the consequences before it happens. Ideally.
Yeah.
I don't, and I'm not asking you to, but you set an expectation for your. I'm not asking you to get into the details of the situation.
Yes,
Like
I got you.
I'm using it as an example, but you
Sure.
your son knew what the expectation of when to come back home,
Right.
and you did or you didn't explain the consequence with him, right?
Yeah.
Now it's gonna come to it that you're probably gonna have a conversation about if this happens again, because this has happened now, and these are the results of what has happened. Trust was broken, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop trust for a long term. That said, we need rules to this. Every game has rules, and in this game of life, we need rules. And this is just so that we know how we're going to act. Because look, I want your well-being, and I want you also to express yourself because that is your well-being. But also, I want to make sure that you're safe. Anyhow, I bring that up to say sometimes consequences are there and they're known. Sometimes we have to come back and say, okay, no, we need to put these in place now for later on.
Yeah.
You're asking what are my relationships with consequences? Of course they're necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a natural cause and effect. Yeah.
Right. And it's funny you say that. Like, sometimes you think like the best laid plans, right? But parenting is messy, and sometimes you're like, oh shoot,
You're building the plane as you're falling out the sky.
Exactly. Yeah. You're like, oh, I should have, if I would have said that first, so that have made sense. And sometimes you do have to, like, you have to back it up and re-explain or come back to it. But you're right that if you can see, and the more you do it, putting the expectation and the consequences of, you know, I've worked with coaches that say, like, you can make your choices, but you don't get to decide the consequence to that choice.
Yeah.
Like,
do you remember Wooden? I remember
gosh,
there was a player. Was it Dr. J talking about his hair, and Wooden said, yeah, you have to cut your hair. And he said, no, I'm not cutting my hair. And he said, okay, well, that's okay. And then he was expecting to play, and he said, no, you chose not to cut your hair, and you know, by consequence, you don't play. This is the thing, right? Let them own their choices. Like, you chose to do this. I didn't make you do this. I'm not mad at you, but you chose to do this. And when you know that you chose to do this, you own it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so true.
So that's what came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other things I think, because and Ashley commented on this when we were talking before we set up the podcast, but you have such a calm demeanor, and I'm a big believer in, you know, calm is, for me, it's the place I learn. It's how I want my house to be. You know, learning to regulate the nervous system has been such an amazing tool in producing, like, just having a healthier life and a healthier home. But, you know, there are moments in parenting when, you know, the blood pressure goes up and the stakes are higher, or, you know, for some reason we've been activated. How do you work with parents for, you know, to if the moment arises and it's really hard to be calm, what are some of the things they can do to bring it back, because the communication's so much better when it's calm.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage you not to communicate when your snow globe is shaken. I mean, yeah, there's a lot more to break than build when you're dysregulated communicating.
Yeah.
So I need to be regulated myself because of the people who I interact with and who I deal with, just so I can put that vibe out into the world. And the way I do it is by, of course, with fundamentals: eat, moving, sleeping, your practices. So there are three ways in which we're stressed. You could say there's the regular maintenance of the day. Of this is how you set up your schedule. You wake up at this time, you do this, and that's how you create regularity. And then there's the stressors that come out of left field you weren't expecting, a surprise that hits you, right?
Yeah.
And this is what we train for, right? And then there's the stressors by which you expand, like you choose to be pushed beyond this point. And as an athlete, you understand that. When those moments arise with your kids in communication, we are training for those moments, but we don't know when they're going to arise and how they're going to rear their head. So then you assess the tape, just like with any athlete.
Yeah.
What went well? What could we have done differently? What strategies are we putting in place so that we can meet this next time? That's if I'm coaching a parent in regards to if anger is their issue. Then we'd explore what anger means. Anger oftentimes means I'm setting up a boundary, but I don't have the vocabulary or communication skills to actually say this. So I want you to get away from me because I feel threatened. Oftentimes it's a threat of our identity or a threat of our pride as parents. Yeah. It's something to explore with the parent. And if you ask me personally on my practice of how I create calmness, I do practice stoicism, but the question is, right when it happens, what am I not willing to accept? That's one.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and after that, it's because in accepting something, in all moments, I also accept that I'm a creator and I have agency to change it. So the question is, what do I want? And then what is the possibility of creating it? Okay, because that and I could give you a very real story about that.
Yeah.
Some Without getting into the details of it, but some kids lied about something in the class, and I was very upset when it got to my principal, who didn't mention it to me, but was treating me a certain way, and that's his responsibility. Like that's between me and the principal. But I would want him to express to me, "Hey, I've heard this." But because of that, it was creating a lot of it's that unspoken, it's only happening in our head psychological breakdown. I'm like, no, we need to talk about this. What gets mentioned gets managed. Principal didn't do it from his point of view. And I came back to the classroom, and without speaking to the person, I said, my class is my domain, and I'm here to keep you safe. And I heard this, and this that was out there about me. If ever something happened, I understand as to why you didn't come to me and tell me that because you're a kid. Like I get it, but I want you to understand you always have a voice. When you graduate from my class, I want you to be an advocate and speak up because I would have gracefully heard you, and I understand why you didn't speak up. So there's nothing. I'm not mad at you, and I'm speaking to the class in general. I wasn't singling out the person,
Right.
and and I said I understand why you did what you did, and accept it. It hurts, but it's okay. I'm strong enough to bear it, and I want you to know. And for the future, yeah, come to the person and speak to them. When there's
Yeah.
a rumor out there that you don't control, that made me very angry. And I said, what am I
Yeah.
not willing to accept? I'm not willing to accept that someone didn't feel safe in my class. And when someone didn't feel safe in my class, I'm responsible for that, and I owned it. And I said, you know what? What could I have done to make you feel safe? And that's what it was. When I was angry, I was just like, what am I not willing to accept?
There's so much integrity in that question. Like, and I have to say, like, I really haven't studied stoicism to a great degree. I do understand it and I'm drawn to it. But if that's that question, I mean, there's so much integrity in that
I
question.
think, I hear you saying that. In my travels and experiences with different communities of faith, in Islam we say inshallah. In the Christian tradition we say what is it? God willing. In Latin it's a via dolente. It's always acknowledging that you're co-collaborating this with higher forces and greater powers. And if I know that I'm in the flow of that with them, if I'm not willing to accept something, it's just like, hey, this is life. There's something that I didn't choose. I'm not getting my choice, but okay, how can I collaborate with this other writer? That's how
Yeah.
I think about it. And that's in all
Oh my gosh.
traditions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I have a little thing that comes into my mind, and I don't know where I got this. It just came from but it's infinite potential, divine timing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
right. So I
Yeah.
just when in any moment of greatness, sadness, frustration, that is always in the back of my head because it gives me
Mm-hmm.
this calm to be like, whatever's coming in, it's meant to be, and you can handle it. But it's yeah,
Yeah.
it's you really do have to slow it down and let it in, which comes back to the mindfulness. So
I think it also there's a little bit of everything that happened before prepares you for this moment. And in saying everything that happened before, sharing stories of resilience to young kids, like sharing stories of other people overcoming, so then they could think, oh yeah, I've not been here in my lived experience, but I know other people have experienced this.
yeah,
That also contributes to their growing library of wisdom.
yeah.
So
And I realized when I started this that I've been drawn to those types of stories my whole life. So from the time I was a little kid, I was reading about athletes that overcame things, that were injured, people that were sick and how they got better, unbroken, the story,
mhm,
of, okay, how do people survive these things? So I've
yeah,
always been drawn to that because there's something that is so it's like a life raft for the human spirit, right? When you feel like things are hard. And I also believe, nobody should be comparing because everyone's going through something.
sure.
But to
Hmm.
know that people have this deep well of resilience is like it carries me through so many different things. So yes, the storytelling, oh, I'm obsessed with it. So
They say you can't be what you can't see. And
yeah,
so then I can't ask you to move to that if you've not seen again evidence and examples of it. So
yeah,
then sprinkling that through,
yeah.
that's a big part.
So what is a piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Oh man. Oh man. And the only reason I say oh man is because at first I thought take more action, and then I thought you're doing it right. You're taking the right action. Um, express yourself more. I say take more action. Express yourself in the outer space
Take
because
more
I've expressed
action.
myself in the inner space. I think there's a
And
lag,
that
and that's
takes
quite fine.
courage. Yeah, I know, but
Yeah,
it takes
and that's
courage to
fine.
express yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I think that's why I'm at peace so much because I do know myself, and this is my inner citadel, but I think I've been called, which is why I'm in the work now, to invite people to find their own inner citadel. Inner citadel is just that space where you can call your own, that you can retreat to and be calm. Because it is my lived experience. That is why I'm calm. Like I don't seek safe spaces. I am that safe space. It's like Walter White, the opposite. I am the safe space.
Yeah,
But
that is such a beautiful sentiment right there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What advice would I give him? Express yourself. Express yourself. And I've done that somewhat, or he did that somewhat. which is why I'm so freely expressive now, but hey, there's more to lean into, eh? And I think my future self is telling me right now, express yourself, push it out, push it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all I know, we are definitely passionate about a lot of the same topics, and the world needs more of this. So this has been one of my favorite interviews. So thank you so much. Your Show Up framework is brilliant, and I could definitely see us expanding on this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. This
Yeah.
has been a joy. Yeah.
Yeah. So when people want to find you for coaching, what's the best place to find you?
MarcusHiggs.com. That is my website. And they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's where I take all my business. I do have other socials on Facebook. However, the best place is MarcusHiggs.com. Yeah.
Well, awesome. We will put that in the show notes and make sure people know how to find you, because the world of parenting it gets dicey, and your wisdom is great. So thank you so much for sharing it, and let's stay in touch for sure. Thank you for joining us on What I Meant to Say, another production of Inspired Edutainment, brought to you by Be Better Media.